Niosa's Day. She who watches the great voids of sea and space. The trickster goddess of madness, seduction, and humour. That morning, Mavisti Rache walked into the dining room and waved for tea. It was a tea kind of morning, misty, cold, and thoroughly miserable outside. Not that they would stop the revels. Half the staff was dismissed for Ifrovi and would return back in 3 days. It was certainly the younger half of the staff, though not without exception. Tyrola, her co-wife, was poring over her omnipad and chuckling. "Have you seen the dailies?" The woman would be in a drunken stupor by 9. Tyrola hadn't seen midnight in ever, to think of it. Her capacity for drink was astonishing, yet she was living proof that with real devotion you could regularly overcome sobriety by the power of distilled stupidity. "I've seen them. I didn't need to, but I have anyway. That's why we went with Nestor's story." "We always run something funny for Niosa's Day," Tyrola grumbled, tossing down her omnipad with a resounding thump. "That could have been pure gold." "It's ridiculous as it is, and Nestor wrote a surprisingly thoughtful piece." She paused to accept tea from one of the servants, and took a bracing sip. "I used to think Nestor was the fool in this family, but I've come to see I was wrong. She has a gift for the work." Mavisti Rache admits she was wrong. Tyrola gave a snort of derision. "I should issue a statement." "Buffoon. I've always known who the fool is." Within her area of expertise, Tyrola was an athletic businesswoman with a gift for her work. Outside her lane of experience, Tyrola was attractive, but unimaginative and coarse. She had her uses, but she hadn't caught their husband's eye through rapier wit. Tyrola cocked her head to one side like a rhino learning a trick. "So, you buried anything else?" "It was the right thing to do." Mavisti sipped her tea, wanting to be anywhere else. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere relaxing. Somewhere without her present company. "Are you saying we should capture a story like that and kill it?" Triola's expression was sour as she examined the bottom of her glass. She still hadn't forgiven Warwick. "Just to save Warwick from a little scandal?" "You know, there are times when I don't know when you're joking," Mavisti said. Tyrola preened at the perceived compliment. "Or if you're simply being an idiot." It was an uncharitable view of her co-wife, but apt. You couldn't always pick your relatives. Nestor's piece was the right move. Mavis banished the notion with a wave. "She's earning good grades, and there's nothing gained by needlessly aggravating 2 of her professors." That much was true. The wedding footage had been captured by dozens of omnipads and was already out in the wild. Lorem Raylin closed her eyes and studied the headlines. Droll. This year's nod to Niosa's Day. A plethora of stories such as Traditional Wedding, Human Style, and Royal Family Escapes Carnal Combat. Her personal favourite was Nobles Drawn into Orgy Fracas, as if the pods of noblewomen who so graciously invaded Lady Pelafon's ceremony could be drawn into anything against their will. Still, if the articles were disparaging, they were limited in quantity. It was Niosa's Day. Humorous memes were the order of the day, and footage of Thomas Warwick featured prominently. Many offered humorous sound effects. Her favourite offered cheek commentary, as if the whole affair were a day at the races. In fairness, Warwick had done rather well from a standing start, opening a small lead over his pursuit. The mob seemed as interested in fighting each other as they were in the chase, but for a tumble on the wet grass he might well have escaped. Unfortunate for him. Fortunate overall. A protracted chase could have transformed an incident into an issue. The fool was arrested by a stone wall, yet the groom rose, stunned but unharmed. His escape cut off, Warwick seemed to consider climbing a tree. Women shouted claims about the wreath clutched in his hand, the clamour drowning his words. She was able to clear the resolution using 3 different feeds and a translation matrix. Fuck you, Marlin Perkins felt incongruous to the moment. She rather enjoyed the footage of Captain Tonnis tossing her husband over one shoulder. The bride had good form, as Warwick waved his fist and shouted. Ultimately, the casualties amounted to 4 chipped tusks, 2 broken arms, the resurgence of a minor feud between Lady Gippsland and Lady Retora, and the groom's suit. Manageable. Remains of the wedding wreath were claimed by Dame Magand, a retired marine with a vicious left hook. Raylan suspected there was far more than an omnipad in Magand's clutch purse, given the way she bludgeoned 2 women down before claiming victory in the Empress's name. A canny touch, as Basuta baited. Banishing the stories and giddy commentary, Raylan pulled open the formal reports. Kalira's desk heads had been busy over the last few hours. Within moments, she was staunchly upright in her reading chair, no longer so cheerful. Her husband lay his hand on hers. Is something wrong? Am I so transparent? She refocused on the here and now regarding her family. Only to us. Cassand means only to him, but it's nice to be included. Marin glanced up and set aside her artwork. Still, you don't look yourself. Is something wrong? A feeling. Preparations are being made, but I'm unable to determine what or why. Marin cocked her head. You left out who? No longer a mystery. Lorem sighed heavily. The display of pique brought no relief, and she picked up her drink, studying the condensation as it steamed. Precautions were taken. My usual methods fell short, and I find it surprisingly nettlesome. Time to go back to basics. Cassand carved a piece from his papaya, and cocked his head at her. They knew she shared what she could. How, Lorem wondered, could her wife and husband sit passively by with so much left unsaid? Their restraint had kept them from harm's way, but then they had already faced harm simply by being with her. It made her tired. The silver suns, the true crowns, and so many innocents lost along the way. She'd done her best, but she was so very, very tired. But no time to rest. Not yet. And she had to disappoint them again. I fear I need to go out today. She sipped her tea before continuing. Unavoidable. Time for frank discussions. Cassand cocked his head thoughtfully. I'd ask if you'll be back for the festival, but I've seen that look before. I am sorry. The words always fell short. Enjoy it for me? Without you? Nonsense. Marin shook her head dismissively and looked to their husband. I don't mind staying home if you don't, love. The fireworks are lovely, but going out on Nyosa's day is a chore. Cassand gave an undignified snort. Give the tickets to someone you aren't going to arrest, and I'll set aside your dinner. Domestic bliss. Lorem enjoyed the moment, while it lasted. They seldom did when things were in motion. As they sat around the breakfast table, Deshin expected Melondi, Kalira, to work through some kind of acceptance. She seemed to manage rather quickly, considering her family wanted her dead. With nothing to compare it to, Desi waited quietly and braced for the worst. Senshiki leaned close and whispered, Is that blueberry? Fresh from the oven, she whispered back, not looking away from Melondi. What did you say to someone at a time like this? She would have expected Mel to lash out, shout, something. Instead, she digested her accusation against her sister-in-law, steepled her chin on her hands, and said nothing. Senshiki murmured as she leaned subtly closer. Can I have the rest? No, she muttered sharply. Everyone wanted to leave her parents alone. It was the day after their wedding, after all. Unable to sleep, Desi dropped by to check on her father, only to find him making breakfast. She'd said she couldn't sleep and avoided explanations. He'd offered a mug of herb tea and hadn't pressed.
I believe you, Desi, but I have to wonder if Satora's murder was part of this. What about Aurelea? Were there others? Is Laral involved?
Melondi sighed heavily, looking up at last.
I just need to process it all.
Desi bit her lower lip for a moment, but stopped. It was a childish expression. She settled into her chair, watching Melondi. If their charade carried on, she needed to learn Mel's habits better than she knew her own. Every unconscious mannerism, the way she acted under stress, and this was a family matter. Everyone here had sisters but her. How could she expect to understand what was going through her friend's mind? A finger claw teased over her napkin, drawing the muffin away. She slammed her hand down on the table, pulling it back.
"Give me the rest, or I'll kill you in your sleep,"
Zinchiki whispered reproachfully. She popped the last of the muffin in her mouth, ignoring the snarl.
The problem is I can't say anything to anyone, Melondi said, breaking the silence.
Well, the important silence.
"What about the Golden Glaives? Someone at the palace?"
offered one of the twins.
"The Interior? The Ministry of Justice?"
added her sister.
Not options.
Melondi waved a hand at the air vaguely, but everyone took the hint. Deshin had asked for one of Mel's time out from being recorded before saying a word about her suspicions.
I don't doubt my death's heads, but who knows with Agent Davari? She's in family support and worked with Trinia. Do I dare take that for granted? All but a few of the Glaives are with my mother. I can talk to Lady Wickham at the palace, but the MOJ? I have no proof for an accusation. The best thing I have right now is secrecy.
Desi nodded.
You mean she doesn't know that we know?
That we suspect.
Melondi looked away.
But yes, that.
Letzi spoke up.
You have your death's heads.
Yes, and she has theirs. Or Loral's, though she selected them personally.
If I'm right,
Desi said slowly.
If I am, then she won't wait forever before making a move. She'll have to act before the Empress returns. So where does that leave us?
You mean me?
No, I mean us. I'm in this. I dove in as your body double and I'm not quitting now. We aren't either, the twins said in unison. We don't want her near the throne. This is treason, murder. Who knows what else, said the first. We aren't political, but we have a family company. This is a hostile takeover, the second agreed. You have to fight.
I'm applying to the Navy after graduation, Letzi said firmly. I want to believe in the Imperial family.
Do you think Laral knows?
Desi stopped short of biting her lower lip and crossed her arms in a mirror of Mel.
Is he complicit in this?
It doesn't matter. Simple things are never problems. They can be awful, but they're never problems, Desala said. If he's involved, it's a problem, but if he isn't, it's not. The question is, does she need your brother alive?
Desi felt the denial on her lips, but stopped to consider.
She has your niece. Is that enough?
It depends. It's not like the Empress is dead. The Assembly wouldn't balk at an underage heir if there was time, but they might if there were too many questions.
You mean your cousin, Indara?
Melondi nodded.
Indara has a reputation, and she can't have a natural heir. But if Loral's family started looking like a Helcom tragedy, people would talk.
Zinchiki's aside quirked to a pose of second-degree affirmation.
If your forces are equal, you need Warwick. He is adept at a disadvantage and can be duplicitous. She's right.
Desi reached into her bag and passed her extra muffin to Zinchiki.
Besides, my mother is respected at the Academy. You have security, a bunker, and pods of commandos. If you have to wait for the Empress, then so what? We turn this place into your fortress.
Tom lay his head on Solani's shoulder, enjoying the rise and fall of her chest. He held Miv's hand as they watched the movie together. Shalea was in the other room, and there were sounds of packing. If Rovi was drawing to a close and Leia would go home. The students hadn't trickled back just yet, but the staff were already returning. The holiday was nearly over, and the McClendons would be leaving soon too. Tom banished the thought. He kept to himself before leaving Earth, but enjoyed the company now. His family, all together. The familiarity of other humans. He could stop by the mansion and see Santino Barcio. He needed to call Tom Steinberg and look in on Hannah McClendon now and then. It wasn't the same. The prospect felt more like an agenda. Plans, instead of easy familiarity. Phrysis Dasari had charged through the holiday like a cavalry commander, but it'd be nice to get to know Zachariah and Jennifer. There were dinner plans, but they'd be gone in 4 days. He laid back, refusing to look at the headlines. A cursory glance had been more than enough, to say nothing of the jokes and memes. What's pink and purple and riots in the streets? A human at his wedding. He had 1 day of rest without being bothered. His classes for the next semester were sorted, and he had nothing to do. Except avoid the news. My wedding looks like an outtake from the Benny Hill show. They had a lazy morning, so he lay back with Miv and Lani to watch The Saga of Honor. The saga was considered a 12-part masterpiece of Shulvanti literature, and the movies were Solani's favourites. She quoted the lines under her breath. He'd seen 2 already, and they'd settled in for more. The acting was outstanding. He'd loved the first and enjoyed the second. The third was nice. But the fourth? So, I don't want to pick, but are they all like this? Solani hit pause and looked at him. Like what? It's outstanding. Well, allow me, Lani. Tom doesn't pick unless he has something to say. Miv let go of his hand and sat up on the couch. Why don't you enjoy it? Well, it's repetitive. The first heroine joins the Marines and has daring adventures in service of the Imperium before a final battle where she kills the traitor, gets the boy, then retires and quietly dies. Her daughter did the same thing in the second film, then her granddaughter and now her great-granddaughter? Tom grimaced at the screen. They didn't even try to change the story. What's the point? That is the point, Tom. Mevere gave him a soft smile as she dropped into her teaching voice. The unchanging nature of duty is an affirmation of values. The saga demonstrates how every generation can live up to the ideals of the last. We aren't just linked in service to House and Imperium. Honor and devotion unify people across time. Tom looked at his wives. Miv and Lani came from 2 different worlds, both socially and literally, but he could read it in their faces that they didn't understand why he didn't understand. Solani looked troubled that he dinged her favourite movies. He hadn't meant to. The conversation felt like an accident, but he knew it probably wasn't. Sooner or later, her values were going to run into his. That didn't make her wrong. Humans were guilty of the same thing, now and then. How many car chases could you watch over 16 Fast and the Furious movies? The incongruity reminded Tom of another meal and a different movie when he tried to convince his daughter that Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets was unadulterated garbage. Why would humanity build an immense space station, then just throw it away? Why couldn't some science fiction writers tell the difference between a solar system and a galaxy? If you could spend millions on special effects, would it kill a producer to drop $20 on an astronomy textbook? Special effects were nice, but no substitute for a plot. Jessa looked at him like he was speaking in tongues, and he'd put it down to a millennial thing. Here I am, light years from Earth, sitting here with my 2 Shulvanti wives, and they're both giving me the same damn look.
You can't tell me that humanity doesn't value continuity, Tom.
Miv picked up her tea and was looking at him over the rim.
Time and again, you said that humans value tradition.
I've heard it too.
Solani pursed her lips.
You were in a military. What about that? What was the phrase you used? Service before the individual?
Service before self, but the translation to Vatica was close enough. Tom wanted to rebel at the notion of service as the ultimate be-all, end-all. There was more to it than that. There was integrity, commitment, principles as more than arbitrary ideology. Winston Churchill popped into his head. Resistance groups formed in Greece to fight the Germans. Eka and Edis had been pro-Western, but the larger force had been Elas. They were also pro-communist, and when the war ended, Greece faced a decision. Would they become part of the Western world or turn to the communist bloc? Straddling the Eastern Mediterranean, the nation held immense strategic value. And when the time came, Churchill sent in British soldiers dressed in Elas uniforms and they gunned down people in Constitution Square, made quite a pivot in public opinion. The Greeks found out, eventually. Screw the Elgin marbles, they developed an enduring hatred for the British. The country had gone to the west, but the stain of arrogance and presumption. Principles aren't something I want to discuss with my commando wife after dissing her movies. How would I explain? Shulvanti ideology is solid, not fluid. They love the group before themselves. Look, I know you both take this very seriously, and I love that about you. My point of view might even sound treasonous, but it isn't. I know this might be difficult to listen to, and I'm sorry. He waved at the screen where the heroine was frozen in mid-monologue. I just believe the value of the individual gets lost in something like this. Everyone should work together, but there's a time and a place for the individual too. This is a little redundant. You could swap these women around and it wouldn't make a difference.
And you've told me often enough that you hated some things about Earth before the Imperium arrived. That things weren't growing in the right way?
Miv cocked her head, but her expression said she had him, and was wondering when he'd admit it.
The constant tribal fights between nations? Remember what you said about the Roman Empire?
Roman, he muttered. The Romans had ruled an empire like a city-state, and citizens ran roughshod over the locals. It was tribalism. The US had its war over slavery, clothed in states' rights, rather than have a federal system. Tribalism, twice over. Right up to the landing, the United Nations had been anything but, rendered impotent if just one member of the Security Council disagreed. Me over you, us over them, my tribe over yours, our wants over the collective good. Time and again, tribalism seemed to be humanity's bane. Individualism had value, but he didn't have a lot of ground to stand on with the girls. The Shulvanti were the polar opposite. It made meaningful explanations a real pain in the ass. He knew he wasn't going to win this conversation. Winning wasn't the object, it was a discussion, though he didn't have to enjoy losing. Still, Miv was gracious when she made a point, and he did his best to follow her example. The difference between a discussion and an argument was how you felt about it later. I don't know. Maybe. Before the Imperium arrived on Earth, I think nations were dying. Corporations were turning into some sort of techno-feudalism.
I don't know what that means, Solani said.
She hadn't looked happy with the conversation, but let Miv do the heavy lifting. Now they had won, at least as far as they were concerned. Tom wanted to let it go, but couldn't. Not yet. Well, we had rich people with their businesses, like the heads of some of the big imperial houses. Most people work from paycheck to paycheck, while the wealthiest 1% own more than anyone else. And the wealthiest 3 people, well, the numbers don't matter anymore. Sometimes it felt like our middle class was disappearing in favour of technological serfdom.
That sounds like the consortium, so maybe we did set you free,
Solani said. She'd offered up the maybe, and he tried to take comfort in that.
And that isn't apt for the Imperium, Tom. People aren't wage slaves and can live on the basic stipend if they want to. Something that struck me about humans when we were on Earth was the shopping. And yes, I saw that Imperial goods were overpriced, but I mean the usual fare.
Miv sat back, arching an eyebrow.
How could humans complain they supported the rich if they're so willing to buy useless things they couldn't possibly need?
Most of the time he could forget how different the Shivanti were. Set aside the macro-level stuff, and they were just people. He loved Miv, Leia and Lani. He loved Desi and the girls. He cherished his friendship with Perdine. But there was nature and nurture. The Shivanti might just be folks, but they were not human. Not often, but every once in a while the differences were glaring. Maybe it was a gulf of perception, and there were things he questioned which they accepted, while the reverse was just as true. It was built in. Fundamental. It felt like asking a fish if it felt wet. It was like the damn security. Tom understood their concern for Kalira. He hadn't liked being spied on, but he'd understood it. For him it had required understanding. Miv hadn't batted an eye. And Lani? Solani had been on the other end of the cameras. I will not pick a fight the day after my wedding. I suppose, he said.
Which is human, for we win, but he doesn't want to admit it.
Miv gave Solani a sly look before turning back to him.
We love you anyway.
Lani pulled him into a bear hug that left him breathless.
Can we finish the movie now?
Tom settled in to enjoy the ride. In the end, some things were just...
a matter of perspective was what it was.
Trinia da Seren, Duchess of Watriatori, sat at her desk and assessed the situation. Violence was on the rise, but not really. But if you repeated a lie with enough conviction, you'd find people willing to believe the worst. And during Ifrovi, it would hardly make a difference. The holy days were a balm to the collective id. They were necessary, but no one wanted to focus on problems. Nyosa's day was already a riot in motion. With the addresses behind them, the public wanted to celebrate, and there was no more ridiculous day than today. People ran amok in the streets, pulling all manner of pranks before shouting a prayer to Nyosa. Anyone with sense stayed home. The streets were packed, which spoke volumes about how many people retained good sense. Still, venturing out had its advantages. Her recent trip to the human's wedding, in particular. Kalira needed to die. A time and a place would resolve itself, but the manner was essential. It could not reflect on her family, that much was obvious. As for it being an assassination, that much was fluid. The Empress had stretched forth her hand to smite down the Alliance pirates who'd killed her daughter, and the Imperium was racked with her grief. It was also fired by her anger. Enlistments into the armed forces had reached record levels in the desire to smite the Alliance. Sentiment against the Alliance and Consortium was on the rise, stoked by certain more loyal-than-thou nobles. It was brain melodrama, and not in the interest of a unified Imperium. That did not mean it was without use, and she'd devoted the morning to research. Humanity had a melange of religious beliefs, and the priests of their outreach mission professed a bewildering array of faiths that seldom agreed with each other. Historically a violent race, religion had been a motive unto itself for pogroms, genocides, and all manner of crusades over the slightest difference in orthodoxy. A little over 3 dozen faiths, the priests were unknown to the people of Shill. Their presence represented a limited resource, but used well, they were a limitless opportunity. It merely came down to finding the right thread and pulling. As a matter of policy, The Imperium did not interfere with the native faiths of member species. Some rites were put in check, but overt interference in matters of faith was simply counterproductive. It caused needless unrest with no positive return. Violent as it was, even the Rakiri hunt had been allowed to thrive. But there had to be limits. In matters of faith, as with everything else, humanity stood out like a bloody fist clutching a dagger. There was no subtlety to their thirst for violence, and it permeated their systems of belief. They were exactly what she needed, though preparation was essential. Many human faiths were part of a monotheistic patriarchy. Three proclaimed, quite loudly, to be following the eternal word of God, and it was essentially the very same God, but they could not decide if their prophet had arrived again, or had yet to arrive at all. Each had innumerable sects, where the differences were as minute as they were bewildering, but one thing stood out. She'd dithered over the choice for a time. The morning had given her time to make her selection. Given the number of Christians at the mission, they seemed the most suitable. Delving into their holy text for answers only produced more questions. With 22 editions, multiple translations crossed innumerable languages, and written by a pre-Technic society, its adherents still seemed unable to believe in the prospect of a mistranslation. The word of their God was eternal and unchanging. For sheer violence, there could be no comparison. Over its recorded history, it had carved through empires, supported holy wars, co-opted native faiths or simply eradicated them. It had burned women for heresy, torched libraries, and put nations to the sword. During the Age of Expansion, it had carved the undeveloped world into pieces. It was a violent, unrepentant ocean of bloodshed, yet it would have gone unremarked but for one particular report. An agent had asked about something called the Troubles. A diligent young woman stationed in Ireland, the region featured marches that could devolve into drunken mayhem. Wanting to put a stop to the matter, her report read like a woman falling down a sinkhole. While the issue was sectarian, it had become clothed in religious extremism between two different sects. Endeavouring to understand their differences, her investigation had not been well received by either party. She'd done her best to come to grips with the issues, and her report focused on a subtext named Leviticus, which appeared to be a manual of regulations. Human crimes and punishments were odd. According to Leviticus 1:9, one should burn a bull on the altar. The bull was a meat animal, but driving the animals into a Sunday service failed to improve local relations. The practice seemed to have abated, with sacrificial burning restricted to fire pits at homes during football season. As an addendum, North American football differed from football on the rest of the planet. Humans seemed untroubled by Leviticus's admonishment that touching the skin of a dead pig made one unclean, and regularly tossed a pigskin. The explanation failed to reconcile matters, but footballs remained unrestricted. Eating shellfish was an abomination, according to Leviticus 11:10, though the agent was unable to get an answer on the eating of hellcats. Leviticus 18:22 firmly stated that same-sex relations were also an abomination. The removal of males as potential husbands was certainly distasteful, but the agent was uncertain if sexual orientation was a greater or lesser abomination to a shrimp salad. Leviticus 19:19 railed against planting two different crops in the same field, before winding into prescriptions ranging from cursing to wearing clothes with two kinds of thread. Interviewing residents over cotton polyester blends received curious looks. Men having their hair trimmed about their forehead was expressly forbidden by Leviticus 19:27, yet hair salons and barbershops remained unburnt. According to Leviticus 21:20, Humans could not approach an altar of God with a defect in their sight. Imperial medicine provided corrective vision along with other advances, but no particular tie was discovered. Quite troubling, Leviticus 25:44 stated it was acceptable to own slaves of either gender, provided they were from other nations. The implications were deemed alarming, yet slavery appeared to be absent in the sector. Another book, Exodus 21:7, provided that you could sell your daughter into slavery, but said nothing about finding a suitable foreigner. Questions at a local orphanage went particularly badly. Trinia closed the report disdainfully. She performed acts both great and terrible. The one thing she hated were hypocrites.
So much for their unchanging word of God. If you're really doing an evil, have the tits to commit.
Still, she'd found her mark. The how and the why didn't matter. The public was bereft after Princess Calandra's death. When Camordra's demise was announced, they'd be in a stupor. Kalira's death would stoke a rage for revenge, as the public sought for how and why in vain. There would be a storm of recriminations, as people demanded vengeance. But that was of little consequence. Kalira would be dead, and that was everything.
Father, bless this establishment and employees as they prepare and serve our food. Thank you for the opportunity to have our meal brought to us, and the ability to relax and enjoy this time with one another. We understand our privilege to be here, and we pray to be a blessing to those we encounter in this place.
Santino Barcia opened his eyes and smiled at the meal.
Amen.
As an early working lunch, the food could be plain. Today he had guests, and Monsignor Barcio felt he could indulge. The plate of Hellcast ravioli in a creamy garlic sauce smelled divine.
I wish I could offer you some, Rabbi Solomon.
Thank you, Monsignor, but I'm content with my lactose.
Solomon's face said nothing, but his bushy eyebrows carried the load.
Besides, Hellcast is not kosher.
Father O'Hannon?
I'm just fine, thank you. O'Hannon raised his glass cheerfully.
You're only having whiskey?
It settles my stomach.
Pish!
Solomon scoffed.
Of course,
Barcia said. O'Hannon seldom drank, and it was a holiday. Beyond that, the matter with Godi Endberg during the wedding required quiet discussion. The man had far more to repent than O'Hannon's small excess, and he offered another small prayer that Warwick would be forgiving should the matter arise.
Interesting news from yesterday's outing.
Barcio came at the topic obliquely. Solomon's brows knit together.
The man is a Schmedrick. He should not have come.
The mission has always been meant to be representative, and Asatru has seen a surge of faith since the Imperium arrived.
Barcio tried to be diplomatic. He could serve penance later.
His inclusion was meant to show we're all connected.
He's very popular with the Marines. O'Hannon grinned impishly.
I feel more connected already.
Solomon rumbled sarcastically.
Putz!
Trinia Daceran considered her options. It was always preferable to use a cat's paw. By remaining at a distance, you kept involvement a secret, leaving your reputation unspoiled. Unsullied by mistakes and nasty deeds, it gave one the freedom to act. Granted that freedom, one was like a ship at sea, able to go when one wished, where one wished, and commit to the port of one's choosing. The time for action would come, but it was better by far to act with surety. Timidity was danger. Strong and bold action was life. And mistakes made through audacity could be corrected by more audacity. She was the prince's consort, and if all went to plan, so much more. Her plan was sound, if formative. There was still time to add one more string to her bow. She reached for her omnipad and placed a call. Few people kept her waiting. Delays past the 5th tone were rare. The call reached 6 when she heard it connect.
Trinia!
Eliana's face swam into view.
It's been ages.
I agree, absolutely.
Empty flattery was wasted on Eliana Varun, but it did no harm either.
It's been far, far too long.
Not my doing. I wouldn't have wished it so. I got busy, but you much more so.
It's true. Things great and small.
Trinia smiled warmly. Eliana had been a gifted agent, before an early departure, and they'd spoken over the years. Trinia had every reason to keep in touch regularly. Unusual calls would never do.
We shouldn't have let silly details get in the way of friendship. How could we have let it happen?
You could always pick up your omnipad.
Eliana's face was older since she'd last seen her, but the woman's eyes were still as sharp.
It's not like your fingers were broken.
You know how Laurel eschews public life, and now?
She rolled her eyes.
It's been simply impossible. You know I'd come to see you.
Eliana nodded, a picture of sympathy.
I'm sure it was terrible losing Orlea and Setora. I'd have come to you in a moment to lend my support. Even a hint would have done. I know, but Laurel's been inconsolable since we returned. It came as such a shock. It's nothing but grief, I assure you.
She shook her head dolefully.
I have to take care of him. I can only imagine. I followed the news, of course.
Eliana settled back away from the camera.
It kept me thinking of us in the old days, out in the galaxy instead of wives and mothers, managing our estates.
Oh, let's not wish ourselves into the sun. We aren't that old yet.
Trinia sat back and regarded her old acquaintance and sometime ally.
We've both come a long way.
A very long way, if not always together.
Nonsense. After all, you retired from the interior first. You who disappeared into your estates.
She waggled an admonishing finger.
The day never passed when you were out of my thoughts.
Forgive me if that wasn't obvious.
Trinia laughed, scoffing at the remark, but Eliana was not so accepting.
No. I developed my affairs, but when there were accusations about involvement with the Suns, before they were proven false, was there a word of support from you? Not one, when it would have meant so much.
Eliana, we're parents now.
I have a daughter, you have 2 daughters and a son, and we're both shouldering the weight of our obligations. You know what it's like, and I have to worry about anything reflecting on the Tassoon name. It's always there, lurking in the background. My life just isn't my own.
Maybe. Yes, maybe. I can see how it would be difficult for you to proclaim friendship for me when things looked uncertain.
There was the question. It wasn't visible on Eliana's face, but she knew the woman. It was there.
I'm glad you're willing to reach out.
Trinia studied her face, letting a touch of sorrow creep into her words.
I need my old friend again.
Eliana studied her through the screen for a long moment.
Now things are getting difficult, you need me?
The words could have meant anything, after discussing old friendships and fresh loss. Trinia knew exactly what she meant. She had no doubt Eliana knew it too. Still, there were the usual denials to be made. The call would pass any scrutiny. After all, hers was a family in mourning. As long as the listener was willing to be generous.
Now, would I let that much time go by without calling? I always have, sooner or later.
And she had. So many people she'd kept contact with, just to flesh out the routine of a normal social life.
It's unthinkable that I wouldn't reach out to you, now that I finally have a spare minute to myself. And on Erovi, no less. Of course I'm calling. I need you.
I need my old friend more than I can say. Well, I don't know. Eliana looked away. It's been so long. Court politics, the endless gossip, the plots and chicanery by the courtiers. I don't know if I'm up to all that anymore. Oh, nonsense!
Trinia looked at Eliana, measuring her words to the moment.
You just said you'd have come if I asked, and I am. Your children are getting older, and I need you. It would be such a comfort in these difficult times. Please?
A smile crept softly over Eliana's features, and she nodded.
Of course. Forgive me, I am at your disposal.
Trinia smiled at her old comrade, who returned her warmth in equal measure. The moment passed with a word.
It's just...
Eliana grimaced, glancing away.
Just? As long as we're making good, why don't we seal our bond? Tighter than the old days when we were girls.
And there was the Eliana she knew so well.
How? What's closer than family? There's no bond like it. Nothing that says so much.
Eliana said earnestly, canting her head slightly, as if to underscore how evident it should be.
After all this time, there's nothing else that would make such a public declaration of what we mean to one another. A marriage? You're thinking of Laurel.
It seemed the safest assumption. Eliana was too old to have more children, and...
Deeps, no. I was thinking of your daughter.
Eliana knew how to twist a phrase, but she was anything but indirect now.
My Rochelle is a fine boy, and shows a great deal of promise. He's not too old. Why not to Prendy? A public declaration between our houses, when your daughter comes of age. To my daughter?
The implication swam through her mind.
We're the oldest of friends.
Eliana's smile blossomed.
Don't tell me now you're married to Laurel that I'm not good enough for your family.
Trinia weighed her options. She had assets of her own. Security, operatives, but she'd always kept her dealings small, quiet. There could be no aspirations on Laurel's name, nor their family. She'd cultivated isolation, performing good deeds while saying little. Distance had left her with a spotless reputation as a duchess and loving wife, but without the assets she'd require. Eliana loved keeping her Pezrin, and a stable of mercenaries would be ever so useful. Eliana offered options, and she'd named her price. It was a long-term commitment. They were sink or swim together.
Well, of course. Why not?
Trinia's smile blossomed like a spring morning.
A positive stand by my family in these dark and terrible times. Oh, Eliana, we'll be grandmothers together. Have you thought of that? Trinia, I've thought of nothing else since you called.